Review the latest intel. We need consensus. The data shows increased risk in the eastern sector. Agreed. We need to adjust the timeline. Good. Proceed.
The footage was 11 seconds long. That was all they had. A classified debrief room inside Quantico. No windows. 4 men around a table that had seen better days. Coffee going cold. The kind of room where careers ended and questions never got answers. The analyst, a trim man named Shelby with reading glasses he never actually used, clicked play for the 3rd time that morning. Helmet camera footage. Shaky. Desert dust. 4 soldiers pinned behind a collapsed wall somewhere in the Syrian interior, taking fire from 3 directions. You could hear the panic in the breathing. You could feel the weight of it. Then one by one the threats stopped. Clean, precise, no fanfare. And for just a moment, just a flash, the camera caught something moving through the smoke on the far side of the compound. Not running, not ducking, walking, calm, deliberate, a rifle slung over one shoulder. A woman, then gone. Shelby paused the frame. The man beside him leaned forward. You get anything on her? Shelby took off his reading glasses and set them on the table. No name, no file, no record of anyone matching that description being cleared for that operation. He looked at the frozen image on the screen. Grainy, indistinct, but unmistakably real. We know what she did. We just don't know who she is. The room was quiet for a moment. How long ago was this? Shelby closed the laptop. 6 years. 6 years earlier, the loudest thing in Regan Cole's life was the wind coming off the Bitterroot Range. She lived alone on 40 acres of forest land outside Lolo, Montana. A house that needed more than she gave it. A woodpile she kept stacked because it gave her something to do with her hands on October mornings when the light came in low and gold and made everything feel like a question she didn't have an answer to. She was 39 years old. She worked for the U.S. Forest Service as a field ranger, mostly alone, mostly on foot. She drove a truck with 160,000 miles on it, and she knew every road, every ridge line, every drainage ditch between her station and the Idaho border. She did not own a television. She had 17 books on her nightstand and a coffee maker that was older than most of the people she would later stand beside. She was by every visible measure unremarkable. That was not the same as unimportant. Every morning she made coffee the same way. Black, 2 cups. She carried the second one out to the porch and sat in the same wooden chair, and watched the light change on the mountains. There was a cell phone on the railing. Most mornings she picked it up, scrolled to a name, held her thumb over the call button. She never pressed it. The name in her contacts was June Cole, her mother. Gone 4 years now. She hadn't deleted the number. She wasn't ready for that to be a permanent thing. Regan put the phone back on the railing and drank her coffee and watched a pair of hawks work the thermals above the tree line. They didn't struggle. They didn't fight the air. They read it, adjusted, and let it carry them. Her father had taught her that. Earl Cole was a Gulf War veteran who came home in 1991 with a bad knee, a quietness he never fully explained, and a complete and total distrust of anything he hadn't learned himself. He didn't believe in shortcuts. He didn't believe in luck. He believed in preparation, repetition, and the particular clarity of mind that came from doing something 10,000 times until your body knew it better than your brain did. He moved them to Montana when Regan was 4, bought the land with money he'd saved, and some he'd borrowed from a brother who understood that Earl needed distance from certain things without needing to be told what those things were. He built the house mostly by himself. He grew a garden that barely survived the altitude. He taught Regan to read tracks in snow, to move through woods without sound to understand weather, by the way it felt before it arrived. And when she turned 7, he handed her a .22 rifle and said 4 things. Raid the wind, trust your gut, never waste a shot, and always know why you're pulling the trigger. She thought about those 4 things a lot. She thought about them when she was 15 and had just made a clean kill on a mule deer at 400 yards with a crosswind that would have pushed most adult shooters off target. She thought about them during long solo shifts in the forest when there was nothing but her and the rifle and the particular silence of wild country that hadn't seen a human being in months. She thought about them on the afternoon 3 years ago when she drove to Billings and identified her father's body at a county hospital and then drove back to Lolo alone in the dark with the radio off. He had died quietly, heart in his sleep. 71 years old, he had not suffered. She was grateful for that. She was also in a way she could not entirely explain completely at sea. The house took her 3 weeks to clean out, not because there was so much of it. Earl Cole was not a man who accumulated things. He owned tools, books, outdoor equipment that he used and maintained carefully, and almost nothing else. The house was spare, practical, Every object in it had a purpose, which was why the letter was so strange. She found it on a Saturday in late October, 2 weeks after the funeral. She was going through the desk in the back room, the room Earl had used for paperwork and the occasional half-finished carpentry project, when she pulled open the bottom drawer and found beneath a folded topographic map of the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness a plain white envelope, sealed, unopened. The return address on the upper left corner read Aldous Crane, retired, U.S. Army Intelligence, Fort Belvoir, Virginia. The postmark was dated 3 weeks before her father died. Reagan sat with it for a long time, turned it over once, set it on the desk, looked at the wall above where her father had tacked a single photograph, a black and white shot of the Kuwaiti desert taken from inside a vehicle, the light flat and enormous and going on forever. She picked the envelope back up, ran her thumb along the sealed edge. Then she put it in the breast pocket of her flannel shirt and went back to work. She wasn't ready for that one yet. The call from her friend Dana came in late November. Dana Whitfield worked as a county surveyor in Tucson and spent most of her free time at shooting ranges, which was how she and Reagan had met at a Forest Service training seminar 8 years earlier. Dana had a gift for enthusiasm that Reagan lacked, and Reagan had a gift for precision that Dana lacked, and somehow that had made them close in the way that opposites sometimes do when neither person is trying to impress the other. "There's a competition in Arizona," Dana said. "Outside Flagstaff, civilian long-range event, legitimate, 500 to 1,300 yards, multiple positions, wind variables." "I'm busy," Reagan said. "You're not busy. You're grieving by doing chores." Reagan said nothing. "Come down," Dana said. "Shoot some paper. Eat something that isn't out of a can." The competition was held on a private ranch outside Flagstaff on a cold December weekend. Clear skies, steady northwest wind. About 60 participants. The kind of event that attracted serious recreational shooters, retired military, competitive hunters, a few former law enforcement. People who knew what they were doing and expected others to as well. Reagan signed in under her full name, which no one recognized. She drew her rifle from the case, her father's Remington 700, a rifle that had been shot so many times the bluing had worn to silver on the barrel's high spots, the stock repaired twice with epoxy and wrapped once with grip tape that Earl had never gotten around to replacing. It was not an impressive-looking weapon. She found her position on the line, settled into her natural point of aim, and waited. When the first relay began, she shot the way Earl had taught her. No theater, no ceremony. She read the wind off the grass in the mid-range, and the flag movement at distance made her adjustments once and did not change them. She breathed in, breathed out to the natural respiratory pause and pressed. The first target rang clean, then the second, then the third. By the fourth relay, people on either side of her had slowed down to watch. She didn't notice. She was somewhere else entirely. Somewhere inside the particular focus that had no name. She knew of the place behind the eye, where the noise of the world went quiet, and there was only the reticle and the wind and the distance and the moment just before. She finished the course without a single miss. Her aggregate score was the highest the event had seen in 4 years. She packed up her rifle before the scores were formally announced, nodded to Dana, and walked toward the parking area. She didn't want a trophy. She didn't want applause. She had come because Donna asked her to, and she had shot because it was the only time in the 3 months since her father died that she had felt completely unambiguously herself. In the second-to-last row of spectator chairs, an older man in a gray canvas field jacket watched her go. He was in his late 60s, lean and straight-backed, with the kind of stillness that comes not from peace but from discipline, practiced long enough that it becomes indistinguishable from peace. He had a small notebook in his hand, open to a page of handwritten notes. He looked at what he'd written. Then he looked at the woman crossing the gravel lot. Then he closed the notebook, tucked it into his jacket pocket, and stood up slowly with the careful deliberateness of a man whose joints had opinions about cold weather. His name was Aldous Crane. He had been waiting for this for a very long time. He showed up at her door in Montana 5 weeks later. January. Hard frost on the porch boards. 6 inches of snow on the woodpile. Reagan had just come in from a morning walk along the ridge when she heard tires on the gravel drive and looked out the kitchen window to see a dark green pickup. Not new. Not flashy government plates that might have been government plates, or might have been the kind that weren't quite what they looked like, pulling up in front of the house. She watched the man get out. Gray field jacket, careful movements. He looked at the house before he walked toward it, the way someone looks at a place they've been told about but never seen. Assessing, respectful. She opened the door before he knocked. He looked at her without surprise. "Reagan Cole." "I know who I am," she said. A very slight smile crossed his face. He did not offer his hand right away. My name is Aldous Crane. I knew your father. He paused, gave that a moment. I sent him a letter about 3 weeks before he passed. I imagine you may have found it. She looked at him steadily. She did not move from the doorway. I found it, she said. Did you open it? Not yet. He nodded as though this made complete sense. May I come in? She considered him for a moment longer. Then she stepped back. He sat at her kitchen table with his jacket still on and accepted coffee without comment. He did not look around the room the way people did when they were nervous or curious. He looked at her. Your father called me 11 days before he died, Crane said. We'd known each other a long time. We served in different capacities during the Gulf-crossed paths a few times after. We kept in touch the way men do when they respect each other and don't need to be in the same room to maintain it. He looked at his coffee. He called me in the evening, said he'd been thinking, said there were a few things he wanted to say to a few people, and I was one of them. Reagan said nothing. She stood with her back to the counter and her arms folded loosely, and she watched him the way she watched the tree line from her porch, patient, alert. He talked about you for most of the call, Crane said, simply without sentimentality, just a fact. He told me you were working alone in the forest and that you were wasting something. Not a dramatic waste. He wasn't a dramatic man. Just a quiet waste, the kind where a significant talent sits in a drawer because nobody has thought to open the drawer and ask. He looked up at her. He said, if anything happens to me, go find my daughter. A beat. He said she's better than I ever was, and she has no idea. The kitchen was very quiet. Reagan's face did not break. But something moved behind her eyes. Something that had been very still for a very long time shifted slightly like a compass needle responding to a field it had almost stopped believing in. He said that, she said. He did. Crane's voice was level. He was not performing comfort. He was relaying information from a man who could no longer relay it himself, and he understood the weight of that and treated it accordingly. Reagan turned and looked out the window above the sink. The mountains, the snow on the upper ridges, a sky so blue it was almost implausible. What is it you do, Mr. Crane? She said finally. I'm retired, he said. 31 years in Army intelligence. I now consult quietly on a program that provides precision marksmanship support for special operations field units, civilian contractors, voluntary participation, no uniform, no enlistment, no chain of command in the traditional sense. He wrapped both hands around his coffee mug. We work in the gap between what the military can do and what a situation sometimes requires. You want me to shoot people, Reagan said. I want to give you a mission worth your caliber, Crane said. She turned from the window and looked at him. He held her gaze without pressure. Your father's words, he added, not mine. She was quiet for a long moment. I'm a park ranger, she said. I track poachers and clear down trees and write reports about invasive species. I know what you do, Crane said. I also know what you can do. Those aren't the same thing. What happens if I say no? You say no, he said. I finish my coffee, I thank you for your time, and I drive back to the airport in Missoula. No pressure, no follow-up, no consequence. He put the mug down and looked at her directly. But I'll tell you this, the need doesn't wait. The offer can. He stood up, took a card from his jacket pocket, plain white, just a phone number, no name, and set it on the table. Buttoned his jacket, moved toward the door with the same careful deliberateness. Mr. Crane, she said. He stopped. The letter you sent him, she said. What was in it? He was quiet for a moment, looking at the door handle. I told him I thought he'd raised someone extraordinary, and I told him I hoped he'd gotten the chance to say so. A pause. I don't know if he did. He opened the door and walked out into the cold. She didn't call him that day or the next. She went back to work. She pulled on her boots and drove out to the forest and did her job with the same precision she brought to everything. She checked trail cameras. She documented elk movement in the northern drainages. She broke ice on a stock tank at a high-elevation pasture. She ate a sandwich in her truck and looked at the mountains and listened to nothing. That evening, she sat at the kitchen table with the white envelope in front of her. She picked up a knife, slid it carefully under the sealed flap. The letter inside was one page, folded twice. Crane's handwriting precise, economical, unhurried. She read it in full. He had written to Earl that he believed Earl had raised someone extraordinary, and he had asked Earl's permission to reach out to Reagan if the time ever came. He had closed with one line, whatever she decides she should know, that the talent is real. The rest is up to her. She set the letter down. She sat with her hands folded over it and her eyes on the grain of the wood, and she didn't move for a long time. She thought about the hawks on the thermals. She thought about the 4 things her father had told her when she was 7 years old. She thought about the weight of something sitting unused in a drawer and what it costs a person over time to leave it there. She picked up the plain white card. She looked at it for a moment. Then she picked up her phone and dialed. It rang twice. "Crane," said the voice on the other end. "It's Reagan Cole," she said. "I'll do it." A pause. Not surprise. The quiet exhale of a man who has been patient for a long time and does not intend to make a spectacle of it. "I'll make the arrangements," he said. "Pack for 2 weeks. Bring your rifle." She looked at her father's Remington on the rack above the door, worn silver at the barrel, grip tape, a rifle that had been shot 10,000 times by a man who believed that mastery earned over time required no announcement. "One question," she said. "Go ahead." "The program. Does it have a name?" "No," Crane said. "It has a purpose. That's enough." She hung up. 3 days later did she lock the house and drove to Missoula in the dark. In the passenger seat, 1 rifle case, 1 pack, 1 small notebook filled with handwritten ballistic data going back to when she was 12 years old. And in the breast pocket of her flannel shirt folded against her sternum, Crane's letter to Earl. She drove west on Route 12 and watched the headlights pull the white line out of the dark, and she did not turn on the radio, and she did not think about what was coming. She thought about wind. She thought about patience. She thought about a man who believed the most important thing a person could do was learn to see clearly, not just with the eyes, but with all of it. The whole body, the whole mind. The part of you that is older and quieter than language. The airstrip was a single runway at the edge of the valley. A small plane, a pilot who did not introduce himself. 2 other passengers who sat forward and did not look back. Reagan put her rifle case in the overhead compartment and sat by the window and watched Montana fall away below her in the pre-dawn dark, the forest, the river, the ridge lines she had walked for years growing smaller and smaller until they were just the memory of something she had known completely. She put her hand over the pocket where the letter was. Her father had believed she was better than she knew. It was time to find out if he was right. Camp Sentinel did not look like what it was. From the air, it looked like a forestry station, a cluster of low buildings tucked into a fold of the Blue Ridge Mountains in western Virginia, surrounded by mature hardwood forest on 3 sides and a long gravel access road on the 4th that didn't appear on civilian maps. There were no fences with razor wire, no guard towers, nothing that announced itself. The announcement was in what happened inside. Reagan arrived on a gray Tuesday morning in late January, handed off a laminated badge with no name on it, and pointed toward a gravel path leading to a low building with no signage. She had her rifle case in one hand and her pack on her back, and she followed the path without asking questions, because she had learned a long time ago that asking questions in unfamiliar terrain rarely got you better information than simply watching. She watched. 42 men on the training grounds, all uniformed, all moving with the particular economy of people who had spent years eliminating unnecessary motion. She noted the way they carried their weapons, familiar, unself-conscious, the way you carry something you've worn long enough that its weight has become part of your own. She noted the sight lines, the wind direction, the distance between the main building and the eastern ridge. Old habits. Colonel Hargrove met her at the door. He was a compact man in his mid-50s with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of face that had been weathered by both weather and experience into something permanently neutral. He shook her hand once briefly and looked at her with the flat attention of someone whose assessment had already begun. "Cole," he said, "civilian evaluation protocol. That's the official designation." He glanced at her rifle case. "Unofficially, you're here because," Crane asked, "and I trust Crane's judgment, though I reserve the right to change my opinion." He paused. "You'll be evaluated alongside the current cohort. Standard performance metrics. No special accommodation, no adjusted standards." "I'm not asking for any," Reagan said. He looked at her for a beat longer. Then he nodded and opened the door. The briefing room held 12 men. They looked at her the way men look at something unexpected. Not with hostility exactly, but with the particular alertness of people trained to evaluate threat and anomaly, and she was registering as at least the second of those. She found a seat at the end of the back row. The man beside her, broad-shouldered late 40s, a Bronze Star ribbon on his dress uniform, looked her over with the slow deliberateness of someone who wanted to be seen doing it. A message without words. His name was Voss. She looked straight ahead and waited for Hargrove to begin. "You're not here to compete," Hargrove said, standing at the front with his hands clasped behind his back. "You're here to demonstrate. There's a difference. Competition implies someone loses. Demonstration implies you either meet the standard or you don't." He let that sit. Everyone in this room has already met the standard once. You're here to prove you can meet it under conditions that aren't controlled and aren't fair and don't care about your previous record. He looked around the room. We start at 0700, dismissed. As the room cleared, Voss stood and looked down at her. He was a head taller and 40 pounds heavier, and he carried himself with the specific gravity of someone who had been the most capable person in most rooms for most of his adult life. First time in a place like this, he said. Yes, she said, it shows. He said it without cruelty, almost clinical. We've had consultants before, analysts, trainers, weapons specialists. He looked at her rifle case. Nobody with a bolt action and hiking boots. I'll keep that in mind, Regan said. She picked up her case and walked out. She heard him exhale behind her. Not quite a laugh, something between amusement and dismissal. She filed it away and kept walking. The first day was long-range precision, 500 to 1,200 yards. Multiple positions, time pressure applied at irregular intervals by an instructor who took personal satisfaction in calling position changes at the worst possible moments. The SEAL candidates were excellent. They moved with practiced efficiency, raid win with experience, hit their targets at a rate that would have been remarkable in any other context. Regan shot after each of them. She didn't shoot faster. She didn't shoot with more visible intensity. She shot with a consistency that was, in its own quiet way, more unsettling than speed. Every shot in the same place, every adjustment made once and not revisited, every position settled into with a naturalness that suggested she had been doing this not for years, but for decades, which was in fact the truth. By the end of the first day, the comments had moved from muted skepticism to muted attention. Voss said nothing, but he watched. The second day was moving targets and environmental variables. Wind gusts up to 22 miles per hour targets that appeared and disappeared on irregular intervals, a course designed to break rhythm and force improvisation. This was where trained shooters who relied on procedure over instinct began to show their seams. Regan had no seams. She had something her father had spent 12 years building into her, the ability to read a landscape the way a musician reads a piece of music, not note by note, but as a whole, so that the adjustments came before the problem did. She saw the grass bend at mid-range and was already correcting before the wind reached her position. She saw a target begin to move and had already accounted for the arc before it completed. She did not miss. After the second day, a former Marine Scout sniper instructor watched her pack up and said to the man beside him, quietly enough that he thought she couldn't hear, "She shoots like she wrote the ballistics." She had heard. She said nothing. On the third day came the exercise that changed things. A hostage rescue simulation, a compound layout built into the tree line on the eastern end of the training ground. Multiple hostiles, multiple hostages. A time constraint designed to force choices. The point was not whether you could hit the targets, but whether you could identify which ones to hit, in what order, under what conditions, and what you left alone when the geometry got complicated. The candidates went through one by one. Most cleared the course well. A few made errors in sequencing. One under time pressure took a shot that would have clipped a simulated civilian. Hargrove noted it without comment. When Regan's turn came, she moved into position and took her time with the initial scan in a way that made the timing observer frown at his stopwatch. She was burning seconds. It looked like hesitation. It was not hesitation. She was counting. She moved through the course and cleared it cleanly. All hostiles neutralized all hostages, untouched time within parameters. Standard notation. Then Hargrove pulled up the course footage that evening and looked at it carefully, and what he saw made him set down his coffee and look again. He called her to his office the next morning. Small room. Desk, 2 chairs, a topographic map pinned to the wall. He sat behind the desk and she sat in front of it, and he looked at her with the same neutral attention he brought to everything. "Walk me through the hostage course," he said. "Standard left to right clearance," she said. "Priority targets first by angle, then by weapon orientation." "You paused at the beginning for 4 seconds," he said, "longer than any other candidate." "Yes." "Why?" She was quiet for a moment. "Because when I counted the boot prints in the mud at the compound entrance, only 3 sets came out. 4 went in. I needed to account for a 4th individual before I started moving." Hargrove looked at her steadily. There was no 4th individual written into the scenario. "There was a 4th individual in the scenario," she said. "A simulated civilian in the rear storage room on the north side. Not visible from any standard approach angle. I found the prints and adjusted my clearance route to confirm before I committed to the sequence." Hargrove was quiet. "The instructors who designed that course," he said finally, "put that civilian in that room 3 months ago as an unmarked variable. In 3 months, no candidate has identified them before entering the compound. He paused. You found them from boot prints in mud at 40 feet. My father was a tracker, Regan said, before he was anything else. Hargrove wrote something on his notepad. He turned it so she could not read it. Then he folded his hands. Dismissed, he said. She stood. Cole, he said. She stopped. The program Crane runs. I've had reservations. Civilian involvement in operational support carries risks that the people who approve these things in Washington tend to underestimate. He looked at her evenly. My evaluation of your performance is independent of any prior arrangement. You'll be assessed on what I see. That's all I'm asking for, she said. She left. That evening, Voss found her in the armory, cleaning her rifle with the focused attention she brought to the ritual every night. He sat down across from her without being invited and watched her work for a while without speaking. She didn't look up. 6 years ago, he said finally, I lost 2 men on an operation in eastern Afghanistan. Good men, experienced. They were taken out by a shooter we never identified. He stopped. If we'd had better overwatch, it might have gone differently. He said it the way someone reports a fact they have been carrying long enough that the emotion has worn smooth. I'm not saying that to justify anything. I'm saying it because I owe you that much context. She set down the cleaning rod. You don't owe me anything. Maybe not, he said, but I said it anyway. She looked up at him then. The earlier assessment was gone from his face. Something else now, something closer to honesty. You haven't bled with us, he said. I meant that. It's not an insult, it's just true. There's something that happens to a person in the field that can't be simulated and can't be taught. Until you've been there, none of us can fully know what you'll do when the moment comes. I understand that, she said. Do you? I know what it's cost me to be standing here, she said. Not in a combat sense. I'm not claiming that. But I'm not standing here because it's convenient or interesting or because someone flattered me into it. She looked at him steadily. I'm standing here because my father believed this was what I was built for, and he's gone now, and the least I can do is find out if he was right. Voss looked at the Remington on the table, the worn stock, the silver-scraped barrel, the grip tape that had never been replaced. That was his, he said, not a question. Yes, he nodded slowly, stood, didn't say anything else. But the next morning when she arrived at the equipment room, there was a field ration pack sitting on her gear locker. Unopened, left without explanation. She understood what it meant, and she put it in her pack and said nothing. By the end of the second week, the word tourist had not been used again. The cohort had not become friends with her. That was not what this was. But there was a recalibration, the kind that happens in rooms full of serious people, when evidence accumulates past the point where it can be rationalized away. They had watched her long enough. They had seen enough. The skepticism had not disappeared, but it had changed form from dismissal to the watchful respect of people who understood that skill at this level was rare and that rare things deserved attention regardless of where they came from. Hargrove's final evaluation contained one sentence that none of the standard candidates received: situational awareness beyond measurable parameters. Recommend advanced field evaluation under operational conditions. That sentence put her on the helicopter 3 weeks later. The operation was a capture mission in Kunar province, eastern Afghanistan. The target was a Taliban logistics courier who had been moving materiel through a network of remote villages along the Pakistan border for the better part of 2 years. The intelligence was solid. The window was narrow. A 6-man SEAL element led by Commander Rourke had been inserted 4 days earlier and was in position. Their designated marksman had been hit on night 2. Compound fracture of the forearm from a fall on unstable rock. Out. Evacuated. No replacement available in theater on the required timeline. Crane made one call. Rourke was not happy about it. He said so directly in a satellite call that Regan was not present for but heard about afterward, the way you hear about things in tight operational circles, obliquely through inference, through the quality of silence, when certain subjects came up. She was standing on the tarmac at a forward staging area in Jalalabad when Rourke walked up to her. He was lean, dark-eyed, angular-faced, with the look of someone who slept poorly and had made peace with it. He looked at her rifle case and then at her, and she could see the calculation happening, the rapid assessment of someone deciding in 30 seconds whether an unknown quantity was an asset or a liability. You've been briefed on the objective, he said. Yes. Your role is overwatch only. You do not engage without confirmation from me unless you are responding to an imminent threat to team personnel. Understood. If something goes wrong out there, there is no official record of your involvement. No evacuation priority. No I understand, she said. I'm not here for the paperwork. He looked at her for another moment. Something shifted almost imperceptibly in his expression. Not approval, more like a provisional suspension of disapproval. North Ridge, he said. Insertion in 40 minutes. She picked up her case. The helicopter went in low and dark, running without lights through the mountain passes. Cold air through the open door, the kind of cold that reached under everything and settled in the bones. Below the ridges moved past in pale moonlight, hard rock and dry scrub, and the occasional light of a distant village that made the darkness around it look deeper by contrast. They put her down on the North Ridge an hour before dawn. She was alone from that point. She found her position in the rocks, a natural shelf that gave her a clear line across the valley and the eastern approach to the village. And she settled into it the way you settle into something you've done so many times that the body does it before the mind decides. She lay still. The light changed. Dawn came in slow and cold over the eastern peaks. The village below began to show movement. First the early risers, then the children, then the market traffic along the central lane. Normal morning in a normal village, except that somewhere in it, a man was moving pieces of a supply chain that ended in people dying, and somewhere on the surrounding ridges, 6 American servicemen were waiting for the right moment. She watched it all. She watched the way you watch when you have been trained from childhood to understand that information is everywhere and that the ability to receive it depends entirely on whether you can quiet yourself enough to let it arrive. 2 hours in, she identified and logged 4 positions of concern along the eastern perimeter. She communicated them to Rourke in spare, precise language. No excess, no uncertainty, just position bearing threat assessment recommended response. Rourke acknowledged each one without comment. The team moved. Then 4 hours into her watch, she saw something that was not on any briefing document. The man was perhaps 60 years old. He moved through the market area with the unhurried manner of someone who belonged there, stopping at stalls, exchanging words, apparently without particular direction. He wore a gray coat and carried a cloth bag. And every 2 minutes, with a regularity that was too precise to be accidental, he stopped, turned slightly, and looked toward the eastern approach. Reagan watched him for 4 full minutes before she was certain. Then she keyed her radio. Rourke, man at the well-gray coat. He is tracking your movement and relaying it. Pattern is consistent and deliberate. I recommend a route change to the north before you reach the second alley. A pause on the other end. You're certain? Yes. Another pause. Longer. Changing route now, Rourke said. 40 seconds later, automatic weapons fire opened up from a concealed position along the southern wall, exactly where the team would have been if they had held their original route. The ambush found nothing but empty ground. The team moved through the north approach and was inside the target compound within 6 minutes. The courier was secured. The operation was intact. Reagan was back behind her scope, watching, breathing, waiting. She was there for 11 hours total. In that time, she identified and neutralized 5 hostile positions, each shot measured, each timing, chosen for the moment when the shot would cause the least downstream complication. No wasted movement. No announcement. Never waste a shot. Always know why you're pulling the trigger. She knew why. Then in the final 20 minutes before the extraction window opened, the scope caught something that turned the morning cold in a different way. Movement on the far rocks. Deliberate. Low. Someone who knew how to move in terrain like this because they had done it many times before. A long rifle. A bipod being deployed with the practiced economy of a professional. Not Taliban. The equipment was wrong for that. Too deliberate. Too expensive. The positioning angle was not defensive. It was a firing solution. She tracked the line from the shooter's position. It terminated on the extraction route, specifically on the position where Rourke would be standing in approximately 90 seconds to signal the extraction helicopter. She ran the distance in her head, 1,100 yards, uphill, left side crosswind reading at 8 knots from the grass movement in the valley floor. She adjusted her elevation, made the windage correction, and settled her breathing. The shooter across the valley was still getting into position, still adjusting, 30 seconds away from being ready. She had one. She exhaled. She pressed. The sound of the shot rolled off the ridges and came back as something almost like an echo fading into the wide, cold air of the mountains. Across the valley, the rifle fell from the rocks. Below in the extraction zone, Rourke stopped walking. He had heard it. He scanned the ridges on instinct and found nothing. No position. No indication of a shooter. His radio crackled. Overwatch. What was that? Silence. She was already breaking down her position. Overwatch confirmed status. She had the rifle back in the case and the case over her shoulder, and she was moving along the back of the ridge, staying low, staying in the shadow of the rock face, putting distance between herself and the position before the extraction window opened. She did not answer the radio. There was nothing to say that the result didn't already say better. The helicopter came in hard from the north. She watched it from 200 yards back from the shadow of a boulder as the team loaded the detainee and checked their numbers and lifted away in a column of coal dust. She waited until the sound faded completely. Then she turned and walked north along the ridge alone into the high country toward the secondary extraction point Crane had established for exactly this contingency. Behind her, the valley returned to quiet. The village resumed its mourning. The wind moved through the dry grass the way wind moves when the immediate crisis has passed and the land goes back to being only what it is. She didn't look back. She never did. The debrief happened in a room that smelled like recycled air and bad decisions. Forward Operating Base Kestrel, a prefabricated building near the flight line walls thin enough that you could hear the wind working at the corners. 3 folding tables pushed together in the center. Maps, laptops, cold coffee, and paper cups that nobody was drinking. Rourke sat at one end. His boots still had dust from the ridge. His hands were clean, but his face carried the particular flatness of a man who had been running on adrenaline for 72 hours and was now sitting very still so that nobody could see how tired he was. At the other end sat a man named Calloway, mid-50s, civilian suit that had not been designed for this climate. He worked for an intelligence oversight office whose full name nobody ever used and whose function, as far as Rourke had ever been able to determine, was to ensure that the people who did the work generated enough paper to cover the people who approved it. Calloway had a folder open in front of him. He had been talking for 11 minutes. 3 separate protocol violations, he said, tapping the folder. Engagement without confirmation. Radio non-response during active operation. Unauthorized departure from designated overwatch position prior to extraction completion. He looked up. Any one of these is a serious breach. Collectively, they represent a fundamental disregard for the operational framework that... She saved 6 lives, Rourke said. Calloway paused. She identified an embedded observer we had no intelligence on, Rourke said. She redirected our route 40 seconds before we walked into an ambush that would have killed at least 2 of my men. She neutralized 5 hostile positions over 11 hours with 0 collateral incidents. He looked at Calloway with the calm of someone who has decided that patience is a tactical choice. And in the last 90 seconds before extraction, she eliminated a professional shooter who had a firing solution on my position. I would have been dead before the helicopter arrived. Be that as it may. Write that in your report, Rourke said. Write all of it, every number, every outcome. He leaned forward slightly, and then explained to me in the language of your protocol framework what the preferred alternative would have looked like. Calloway looked at his folder. He did not answer. The room was quiet except for the wind at the walls. Rourke stood and picked up his coffee cup and looked at it and put it back down without drinking. We had a target to capture, he said. We captured him. We brought him back. Every man on my team is alive and accounted for. He looked at Calloway. If you need to write something in a folder about how that happened, write it accurately. He walked out. What Calloway did not know and would not know for another 2 weeks when a separate internal review surfaced the documentation was that Crane's program had been submitted for operational funding twice in the preceding 4 years. Twice it had been declined. The stated reason both times was the same: civilian contractors cannot be held to military accountability standards in live operational environments, and the legal exposure created by their involvement outweighs the projected tactical benefit. The second rejection letter was dated 18 months before the Kunar operation. Beneath it in the archived file was a handwritten note on plain paper. No letterhead. The handwriting belonged to a 2-star general whose name appeared on a great many documents that very few people ever read. The note said, "Prove it quietly. Results first, paperwork second." Reagan never saw that note. She never knew how close the whole thing had come to never existing at all. She was sitting on the edge of a concrete barrier at the far end of the flight line when Rourke found her 40 minutes after the debrief ended. The sun was dropping behind the western mountains. The air had gone thin and cold. She had her rifle case beside her and her jacket zipped to the collar, and she was looking at the horizon with the settled attention of someone who has been very focused for a very long time and is now allowing themselves carefully to stop. He walked up and stood beside her. Neither of them spoke for a while. "Calloway's going to file a report," he said. "I know. It'll reference the program, might trigger a review." He paused. "Could take time to sort out." "Some things take time," she said. He looked at her. "You're not concerned." I'm concerned about the things I can affect, she said. A report in Washington isn't one of them. He was quiet, watched the last light leave the western ridges. The shot, he said, the one on the far side, 1,100 yards uphill crosswind. He stopped. We found his position afterward. Professional. Hired specifically for that operation. He would have had me. Yes, she said. You had 2 seconds. A little more than that, she said. Not much. He nodded slowly. I've been doing this for 22 years, he said. I've worked alongside some of the best precision shooters in the world. He looked at the mountains. I've never seen anyone do what you did up there. She didn't respond to that. He turned to face her, came to attention. And he raised his right hand in a salute, slow and deliberate. The kind that costs something, the kind a man gives when he is marking a moment he intends to carry. I'm not in your chain of command, she said. No, he said. You're not. He held it. Then you don't owe me that, she said. No, he said. I don't. He kept his hand where it was. I owe you more than that. This is what I have. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she gave the smallest nod she could give while still meaning it. He lowered his hand. He reached into his jacket and took out an envelope. She looked at it. Plain white. Her name on the front, not her code designation, her actual name, written in handwriting she recognized immediately. Not Crane's handwriting, not Rourke's, her father's. Firm, economical, no flourishes. The handwriting of a man who had never wasted words because he had never needed to. She looked up at Rourke. Crane gave this to me before we inserted, Rourke said quietly. He told me to give it to you after the mission. Only after. He paused. He said your father wrote it about a year before he died, that he'd asked Crane to hold it until the right moment. Another pause. Crane decided this was it. She took the envelope, turned it over once. Her hands were steady. They were always steady. That was the training. That was the 10,000 repetitions. But something in her chest was not steady at all, and she was aware of it the way you are aware of weather changing before it arrives. She slid her thumb carefully under the sealed flap. Inside was a single page, folded twice. She opened it slowly. She read it in full. When she finished, she stood very still with the page in both hands and her eyes on the words and the mountains behind them going dark against the sky. Aldous, it began. If you're reading this, then I didn't get the chance to say these things myself, which means I'm counting on you to make sure they reach the right place. I've been thinking about Reagan for most of the past year. Not with worry. I know she's fine. She's always fine. That's almost the problem. She's fine in a way that doesn't ask anything of her, and she deserves better than fine. She is the best thing I ever made. I don't mean that the way fathers mean it when they're proud. I mean it technically the way a craftsman means it when he looks at the work and knows it exceeded the maker. She reads when the way I taught her, and then does something with it I never could. She sees things, not just downrange, everywhere. The way a place is arranged, what doesn't fit, what's missing. I've watched her do it since she was small, and I still don't entirely understand how. I never told her any of this. That's my failure, not hers. Don't make her a soldier, Aldous. She doesn't need rank or uniform or someone else's definition of service. Just give her a mission worth her caliber. She'll know what to do. She always has. One more thing. If she's reading this, and I hope she is, because it means the mission went right and you kept your word, I want her to know this. I was never worried about you, Reagan. Not for a single day. I just wanted more for you than the forest and the quiet and a life that fit too small. You were built for open ground and long distance and the kind of work that matters. I hope you found it. I hope it found you first. All my love. Dad. The page moved slightly in her hands. Just enough. She stood on the flight line with the cold air moving around her and the last light leaving the mountains. And she read the letter once more slowly, the way you read something you want to keep exactly as it is, every word in its right place, nothing lost. Rourke stood at a distance and did not speak. He understood in the way that soldiers understand certain kinds of silence that there was nothing to say, and that presence was enough. After a while, she folded the letter carefully along its original lines. She held it for a moment. Then she put it in the breast pocket of her jacket against her sternum, next to where Crane's letter to Earl had ridden since Montana. 2 letters now, both in the same pocket. Both from the same source in different ways. She looked at Rourke. Her eyes were clear, direct. There was something in them that had not been there before the letter. Not softness exactly, but a settled quality, the look of a person who has been carrying a question for a long time and has just received the answer they did not know they needed. Thank you, she said. He nodded. Crane kept his word. He did. A pause. Is there anything you need before you go? He said. She thought about it honestly, the way she thought about everything. No, she said. I have what I came for. She picked up her rifle case. Cole, he said. She stopped. What your father said about you, Rourke said. He was right. She didn't turn around. I know, she said. I'm starting to. She walked away into the dark. He watched until he couldn't see her anymore. Then he looked down at his hands empty. Clean the hands of a man who had given away something that was never his to keep, and he understood that this was exactly how it was supposed to feel. In the morning, Reagan was gone. The bunk stripped to the mattress. Pack gone. Personal items gone. Everything gone except one thing. On the bare mattress, placed in the center with deliberate care, was a rifle case. The old one. Earl's Remington 700 silver worn at the barrel grip tape stock epoxy repairs that had held through 30 years of use. A rifle that had been shot 10,000 times by a man who believed that mastery earned over time required no announcement. Behind it folded once a note in block print. For the next one who needs it. Voss found it. He had come to return a cleaning kit and found the empty bunk and the case on the mattress. He stood in the doorway a long time before he crossed the room. He sat on the edge of the adjacent bunk. He opened the case. The rifle lay in its foam cutout, cleaned and oiled with the same care it had received every evening for as long as she had been here. He looked at it not as a piece of equipment, but as a thing that carried weight of a specific kind, the kind that has nothing to do with ballistics and everything to do with what a person leaves behind when they go. He thought about a woman who had arrived here without a uniform and left without a medal, and in between had done things he was still trying to find the right language for. He thought about the things she had said and the things she had refused to say. He thought about a father who had taught a daughter to count boot prints in mud and read wind off grass. He closed the case carefully. He carried it with both hands to Hargrove's office and set it on the desk without explanation. Hargrove looked at it, then at Voss, then back at the case. She left it, Voss said. Hargrove nodded slowly. He opened the case and looked at the rifle for a long moment without touching it. The way you look at something you understand the full value of. Then he opened his notepad, wrote 4 words, tore the page out, folded it once, and set it inside the case beside the rifle. He closed the case. Voss looked at him. What did you write? He said. Hargrove looked at the closed case for a moment. The only thing worth writing, he said. He did not elaborate. And Voss, who had learned over 20 years that some answers lived entirely inside the question, did not ask again. 6 months passed. The program continued. Crane submitted the operational outcomes from CONAR to the Oversight Committee, along with a revised funding proposal. This time it was approved without comment, which in the circles where these things were decided was the bureaucratic equivalent of applause. Rourke rotated back to the States in March. He was asked, as visiting commanders sometimes were, to address the advanced sniper cohort at the Naval Special Warfare Center in Coronado. He stood in front of 43 men in a building that smelled like gun oil and institutional carpet, and he put his notes on the podium and did not use them. He told them a story. He told it plainly without embellishment, the way you tell a story when the shape of it is the point. A North Ridge, an 11-hour watch, a woman who counted boot prints in mud and changed a route that saved lives. A shot at 1,100 yards from a position nobody saw, stopping a threat nobody knew was there. He did not use her name. He did not use a call sign. He said only she was somebody's daughter. And she was very good at her job. Then he said what he had been thinking since the night on the flight line. The best thing I can tell you, he said, is this. Find the reason behind the trigger, not the mission briefing, not the order of engagement. The actual reason, the one that holds when everything else falls away. She had it. You could see it in every shot. She wasn't building a record. She wasn't proving a point. She was protecting something real. And that made everything she did different from the same action done without it. Find that, he said, and keep it. He tapped the podium once with his knuckle. He walked off. The room was quiet for a moment. Then, without any signal between them, every man in that room began to clap. Not the performative applause of ceremony. Something slower, more deliberate, the kind that means something. On a range outside Olympia, Washington, on a Tuesday in October, an instructor named Weston arrived before his cohort and found something on the target frame at the far end of the range. He walked out to look. A spent cartridge standing upright on the top edge of the frame. Beside it, folded twice, a piece of paper torn from a small notebook. He opened it, still watching. Don't miss, no signature. He looked up from the note and out across the range to the long line of the tree ridge to the north, 300 yards out and rising steeply into second growth Douglas fir. Early morning light, flat and gray, mist in the low ground, a single crow working the field edge. He looked for a long time. Nothing moved. He folded the note and put it in his breast pocket and walked back to the station. But all through the first relay, he kept glancing north, to the tree line, to the long dark shape of the ridge above it. Then at the very end of the second relay, as the last shot of the morning echoed off the far berm and the range went still there, at the top of the ridge, a figure standing in the open, not crouching, not hiding, standing silhouetted against the pale sky for just a moment, one hand at the side, something long over the opposite shoulder, there for 3 seconds, then gone into the tree line, into the dark between the firs where the light didn't reach. Without hurry, without announcement, with the ease of someone moving through country they know by feel. Weston stood at his station and said nothing. Around him, the cohort was packing up, talking, moving toward the vehicle line. None of them had seen it. He didn't say anything to them. Some things don't translate to people who weren't looking at exactly the right moment. He looked at the ridge for a long time. Then he looked at his clipboard. Then he smiled the small, private smile of a man who has just understood something he had been close to understanding for a while. In Quantico, in the room with no windows, Shelby closed the laptop for the last time. He had looked at the Syria footage many times over 6 years. He had run it through enhancement software twice. He had sent still frames to 3 separate recognition databases and gotten nothing back that was useful. He had reached the conclusion somewhere in the past year that she wasn't in any database he had access to, and that she probably knew exactly which ones those were. His colleague Marsh leaned in the doorway. "Heading out. You coming?" Shelby looked at the closed laptop. "You ever find out who she was?" Marsh said. The same question he asked every few months. Not urgently, just keeping the thread. Shelby thought about a North Ridge and 6 men who came home. A spent cartridge on a target frame in Washington. A rifle in a case on a bare mattress, left behind like a letter written in a language only certain people could read. Boot prints in mud, wind read off grass. A letter a father had written because he had run out of time to say it any other way. "I found out enough," he said. Marsh waited. "She was somebody's daughter," Shelby said quietly, "and she was very good at her job." Marsh nodded once, the way you nod when something is complete. He reached over and turned off the light. The room went dark. Somewhere north of Olympia, in the deep quiet of a Douglas fir forest on a Tuesday morning in October, a woman walked alone through the trees with a rifle over her shoulder and the cold air moving around her, clean and indifferent and carrying no messages except the ones you already knew how to read. She was not hiding. She was not running from anything. She was not waiting to be found. She was exactly where she had always been, most herself, in the space between the question and the answer, in the silence that comes just before the moment of perfect clarity, when everything unnecessary falls away and what remains is only what is true. Her father had told her once on a November morning when she was 11 and they were lying side by side in a frost-covered meadow, watching a bull elk move through the timber at 400 yards, that the best he had ever seen shared one thing. Not speed, not technical skill, not nerve, though nerve was part of it. What they shared was the ability to be completely, entirely present, to exist only in the moment before the shot, to let go of everything that wasn't that. Just this, he had said. Just now. Just the wind and the distance and the reason you're here. She stopped at the top of the ridge. She looked south across the valley and the long line of the Cascades beyond. Wide and clear, very still. She put her hand over the breast pocket of her jacket. 2 letters there, both folded, both carried every day since. One from a man who had believed in her before she knew how to believe in herself. One from the same man saying the same thing written when he understood he was running out of time. She stood with her hand over that pocket for a long moment. The wind moved through the firs below her. Steady, from the northwest, 8, maybe 9 knots. She felt it on her face and knew it the way she knew her own breathing. Then she lifted her hand. She turned north and kept walking into the forest, into the quiet, into the country that had no name on any map and no record in any file and no one watching. Except that last part wasn't entirely true, because somewhere in a folder that would never be declassified, in the memory of 6 men who had come home to their families, in the mind of a range instructor in Washington who had seen a silhouette on a ridge for 3 seconds and understood everything, she was still there. Not as a legend, not as a ghost story passed between operators at forward bases, as the answer to a question most people never thought to ask until the moment the answer was the only thing standing between them and the dark. Who is watching? She is. She always has been.